Dragoness and the Empath, Chapter 11, Gitana, Gummy Troubles. The first few days of their expedition had been surprisingly easy. Gitana, Tulip, and Bright had traveled around 90 miles past Can Diego, walking 9 hours per day. Chapter 11, Gitana, Gummy Troubles. The first 5 days of their expedition had been surprisingly easy. Gitana, Tulip, and Bright had traveled almost 90 miles past Can Diego, walking 9 hours per day. Of course, they took breaks for leftover razzle cherry pie, chocolate cake, and soda. Day 6, however, would prove more difficult. The journey thus far had been only slightly uphill and free of obstacles like rocks and plant overgrowth, but Gitana's feet ached and her stomach was becoming increasingly queasy. She wished she had brought along healthier food for herself instead of worrying about hurting the siblings' feelings. Despite a steady diet of sugar and food her mother would call junk, Bright and Tulip looked perfectly healthy and eager to tackle the mountains that loomed in the distance that morning, until they stood before them a couple hours later. Tulip gasped, while Gitana guessed the mountains were at least 3 times the height of her family's castle in Bloom. Moreover, these were nothing like the mountains Gitana had seen on her fall from Bloom to Can Diego. The mountains in front of them were smooth, brightly colored, treeless, and gelatinous. The only resemblance to the previous mountains was they appeared to be covered with a dusting of snow. "What on earth?" Gitana exclaimed. "What kind of mountains are these?" Tulip looked worried. "Gummy mountains, obviously," replied Bright, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Gitana should have guessed the trip was not going to be all chocolate cookie crumbs and lollipop fields. "They're so tall and slippery looking and almost vertical. How are we going to climb up the side of them?" Tulip asked, echoing Gitana's concerns. "Let's start with the smaller one down that way." Bright, who had cleverly thought to bring binoculars, pointed at a relatively short orange gumdrop about a half-mile west of their straight path through the mountains. He saw Gitana frown, but continued. "If we start with the blue one and we fall," he gestured at the towering giant in front of them, "we'll fall onto the ground we're standing on and get hurt or even die. So instead, we'll enter the mountain range climbing that shorter orange mountain where a fall will be less dangerous." Tulip nodded in agreement. "Once we reach the top of the little one, we can just bounce through the mountains until we get to the path marked on the map. And if we fall, we'll just bounce higher." He grinned. Gitana could tell he relished the idea of bouncing through the mountains as if they were navigating a series of uneven trampolines. Bright grinned. He made it sound fun, but Gitana was scared. Before she could protest, Tulip cheerfully grabbed her arm, coaxing her in the direction of the orange gumdrop where Bright was already jogging. Tulip seemed fresher, lighter. Gitana guessed she enjoyed letting Bright take charge for a change. When they reached the orange gumdrop mountain minutes later, Gitana had to admit it was definitely the smallest mountain in sight. Yet it was still quite tall and the surface too smooth to just walk up. Bright was already unloading the solution from his backpack. He clipped spiked climbing crampons onto the bottoms of his shoes and pulled out 4 more for Tulip and Gitana. "The little teeth on these will help your feet grip the surface, and for your hands, sticky caramel-coated gloves." Bright had done some last-minute reading about the area's terrain the night before they set out, then ran to town for supplies before Tulip and Gitana were even awake. Bright, clearly proud of his research, waited to be praised. His puppy eyes were wide open, begging for his big sister's approval. "Cool, right? I came prepared for everything." Tulip laughed at the adorable look on his face, and Gitana mustered the best smile she could. It was only right to acknowledge his effort, no matter how nervous she felt. "This is awesome. You prepared for everything," Tulip enthused, ruffling her little brother's hair. "Yes, great job, Bright. We'd definitely be stuck here without these supplies," Gitana admitted. Bright stood tall, beaming with self-satisfaction before getting back to preparations. He helped Gitana and Tulip secure their crampons and gloves. Gitana wondered if they should put on the coats they stuffed in their backpacks in case of cold weather, but Bright assured her the weather at the top of the mountains would be almost as warm as the weather below. "How is that possible?" Gitana asked. "There's snow at the top." "Oh, that's not snow," Bright assured Gitana. "That's sugar." She should have guessed. "Okay, let's get started." Bright went first, digging one cramponed shoe into the side of the mountain, then lifting himself up with both hands, making sure his gloves were adequately sticky to avoid a fall. He repeated with the other foot and climbed up about 20 feet before giving the girls the thumbs up to begin their own ascent. Tulip, taking the role of big sister again, instructed Gitana to go first so Tulip could spot her in case of a fall. To Gitana's surprise, her shoes and gloves gripped the mountainside well, so she scuttled up to Bright's position while Tulip followed. They continued like this for more than an hour, their anxiety and burning muscles slowing them down as the distance between themselves and the ground grew. Gitana practically laid her entire body on the mountain, hoping to slide rather than fall down the mountain if she lost her grip. As they neared the dome at the top, Bright again scurried ahead of them so he could offer a hand up to Tulip and Gitana. Once safely at the top, they exchanged high fives and congratulated each other on their hard work. Ugh, can we take a break? Gitana was panting from the effort and quite sick to her stomach. Sure. Tulip looked at Gitana's face. You're not feeling well, huh? No, but I'm sure I'll feel better after resting a few minutes. What's the matter? I just feel a little sick to my stomach. Oh, Tulip offered helpfully. Candy might make you feel better. She fished a beautiful rainbow-swirled lollipop out of her pack. Gitana almost gagged at the sight. No thanks. I think I just need a rest. She did not want to complain about the food. They had been so generous with her, and they had no healthy food for her with them anyway. She would have to manage until they got to a place with the fruits, vegetables, proteins, and grains to which she was accustomed. She silently prayed they would come across such a place soon. Tulip surveyed the mountains surrounding them, noting Bright had accurately predicted there was no space between the mountains, meaning a fall was unlikely to kill or injure them once they were in the middle of the mountain range. But still, it looked like they might be climbing for a couple days. Tulip shared her concern with Bright, who again suggested rather than climbing, they try to bounce through the mountains. Tulip and Gitana's eyes grew wide. It sounded fun, but neither was sure they were athletic enough to pull off bouncing with such accuracy from mountain top to top. But as they rubbed their sore leg and arm muscles, they had to admit it was worth a try. In the worst-case scenario, they would miss and have to climb a bit. Gitana was exhausted just thinking about it. She laid back and closed her eyes, willing her stomach to stop churning. Moments later, she heard a strange noise repeat itself over and over. Boing, boing, boing. Ugh. Gitana was pretty sure she knew what the noise was, and she was right. Bright was already attempting to bounce to the next mountain. It took him 7 tries to land on top of the mountain, a bright yellow monstrosity. Hey, you two, it's easy. Give it a try. Gitana weakly suggested. Tulip, you go first. I'll follow you. Are you sure, Gitana? We can go together. No, I think it will be easier to go on our own, at least to start. Okay. Tulip did not wait, immediately plunging to the valley below, only to bounce up against the blue mountain to the west of Bright's. She plunged again to the bottom before bouncing back even more fiercely this time, somehow landing right on top of a pink mountain just past Bright's. Yeah! Bright congratulated Tulip. Nice job! Tulip was flushed with excitement. Tulip, try to come to this one now. Bright beckoned. Tulip obliged, but this time completely missed the mountain, sailing right over Bright's head into another valley where Gitana could no longer see her. Tulip! Gitana sat up straight, worried. Fortunately, she saw Tulip bounce back up and over yet another mountain top, then bounce off the sides of 2 more mountains, traveling farther away from Gitana and Bright. Gitana, hurry! Let's catch up before we lose her! Bright called. Before she knew it, Gitana found herself plunging into the valley below as if her legs were possessed by a strange, fearless jumping spirit. The wind roared past her ears and stung her eyes with the sheer force of it. Ah! She shrieked, feeling completely out of control. She hit the bottom and bounced up violently. Something inside her was catapulting Gitana far above where Tulip and Bright had landed. She briefly saw Bright's worried look as she plummeted back down to land just a few yards to Bright's left, causing her to bounce off the side of the mountain and back down to the valley floor. She flapped her arms like a crazy person, willing herself to slow down, but her effort was pointless. She continued to bounce up and down, until she mercifully landed on wobbly knees next to Bright. Seeing how unsteady she looked, Bright pulled her into a sitting position, but Gitana immediately jumped up and proceeded to vomit sugar treats down the side of the once pristine yellow peak. "Oh, Gitana," Tulip mouthed in the distance before clasping her hands to her face. Bright, gagged and afraid he might also get sick, bounced away to a different peak, but Tulip bounced over to Gitana, landing as lightly as she could, and held Gitana's hair back as she continued to be sick. Once done, Gitana fell onto her stomach, almost falling off the mountain, but for Tulip pulling her back. "Take a rest, Gitana." She was worried. How were they going to get Gitana through the mountains when she was this sick? Tulip sat down and ran her hand in soothing circles over Gitana's back, murmuring softly, "Do you think she'll be able to move any time soon?" Tulip whispered to Bright, who had bounced back after they moved away from the spot where Gitana had been sick. Bright responded with a wordless shake of his head. Gitana would need to rest for at least a couple hours. Although it was only late morning on day 6, they were forced to take a break. Tulip helped Gitana onto a blanket, then covered her with another, balling up her coat and placing it under Gitana's head as a pillow. Gitana could hardly move her mouth, let alone the rest of her body. "Water," Gitana managed to gasp. Water? Tulip had no idea why Gitana would want water. Reading Tulip's expression, Gitana explained weakly, "I need to drink water." Tulip had used water to boil pasta on occasion, but never thought to drink it. "I have some orange soda," Tulip offered helpfully, but Gitana shook her head no. Although puzzling, this was not the time to ask for explanations. Tulip asked Bright to bounce to the valley below and find a stream with water and bring some for Gitana. Bright, although equally confused, followed directions. Less than 20 minutes later, Bright was back with a canteen full of cool spring water, which Gitana was able to sit up and drink with Tulip's assistance. As it turned out, it was not like Bloom's water, but carbonated and tasted like lemon and honey. But it was all right for Gitana. After having her fill of the sweet, refreshing water, Gitana fell back onto her stomach and proceeded to sleep for the next 2 hours. Fortunately, time was not completely wasted, as Tulip and Bright were better able to plot their course through the mountains from their higher vantage point as Gitana slept. Bright ran his index finger along the map. "Okay, so we bounce from here to this pink one, to that blue, blue to purple, purple to the other pink to yellow, then yellow to green, right?" "No," Tulip corrected. "It's pink to that blue, blue to purple, purple to yellow, yellow to the other pink, then pink to green." "Oh yeah, that's right. Got it." Bright and Tulip had the plan, but they worried about Gitana's ability to keep up given her condition. It was already afternoon when Gitana finally stirred, looking better but still weak. Tulip hurried to give her more water. Gitana's stomach no longer felt sick, but when she tried to get up, her knees trembled. "Oh no," gasped Bright, worrying that a few steps in the wrong direction might put Gitana in danger of falling off the mountain and into a valley she did not have the strength to bounce herself out of. He grabbed her arm to steady her and gently pulled her back to lying down. "We're not going anywhere today," Bright declared, becoming ever more confident in his role as expedition leader. Tulip, although eager to find her parents, nodded in agreement. "No," Gitana protested, trying to get up again, only to feel the world spinning around her. She was angry at herself for slowing them down. Still, she understood there was no way she could go on like this. Tulip patted her hand. "We're all in this together, Gitana. There are bound to be setbacks on the way. Tomorrow it might be mine or Bright's problems that force us to take a break." Gitana smiled weakly, appreciating her new friend's kindness. "Okay," Bright said as cheerfully as he could. "It's time to get the tent up." He retrieved all the parts from his bag and laid them out carefully so none would slide down the mountain. After organizing each piece, he pulled out his hammer and began to pound the center tent pole into the surface. It stuck much easier into the soft, gummy surface than it had on the ground the previous 2 days. Unfortunately, it went a little too easily and slipped right into and under the surface of the gumdrop mountain and disappeared, pulled down like quicksand. Oh man. He silently congratulated himself on bringing an extra pole while reaching back into his bag for it. As he drove the second tent pole into the mountain, a large, terrible ripping sound came from below them, and the mountain shook. Seconds later, all three found themselves being pulled into the hole the tent pole had created, the crack widening just under the shiny surface of the gumdrop. It took only seconds for their bodies to be hopelessly sucked into the sticky substance. Bright! Tulip screamed in horror as his head fell below the surface. Seconds later, Tulip and Gitana were sucked in as well. Gitana's mind went numb as images of her family played out like a movie in her brain. Her mother, father, grandparents, Quarterly and Plum. She was so weak she knew fighting was futile, so she tried to focus on the image of her family's faces as she ran out of breath. She wondered what was happening to them in Bloom and who would help them with her gone. Gitana's eyes fluttered open to see Bright and Tulip, her two sweet friends, succumbing to the same fate as her own, certain death. She tried to close her eyes again, to invite peace back in, but she was unable. She hung there, suspended in goo, forced to helplessly watch her friends die as she suffocated as well. A streak of fire burned through her chest before she finally let go. "Mommy," her brain said before it all went dark. Moments later, Gitana fluttered her eyes open. She was lying in a sticky swirl of blue, purple, pink, and yellow liquid that covered her from head to toe. Yuck! What happened? She vaguely recalled her last moments before pathetically surrendering her life to a giant piece of candy. Despite a massive headache, she managed to sit up halfway. Two other people covered in the same goo sat sullenly in front of her. They looked like drowned rats. Goo dripped off Bright's chin and nose. Tulip looked like she had some coming out of her right ear before she accidentally sneezed a cloud of psychedelic mist right into Bright's face. Gitana almost laughed at how ridiculous they looked, until she saw how they were looking at her. They looked petrified. Of her. "What the heck was that, Gitana?" Tulip whispered, her eyes as wide as dinner plates, placing herself protectively in front of Bright. "Yeah," Bright squeaked indignantly over Tulip's shoulder. "Since when do you turn into a dragon?"